program that takes a number between 3 and 7 and it outputs this hourglass shape. And it does that through storing each of these characters into a node in a linked list. So to figure out how to display this shape, I've done this analysis on different user inputs represented by n, and what I've able to determine is that there are these 4 distinct sections that loop, and we can see a pattern in the number of spaces before, the spaces inside, and the number of stars to draw. So if we take a look at this first part here, we can see that this first part, the number of spaces is n minus 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, for when the user input is 6. And we can see that these spaces decrement by 1 for each row, and it does that n times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There aren't any spaces inside in this part yet. And then after we have spaces before, it's going to draw n number of stars, and it's going to increment by 2 each time in the loop. So this corresponds with the draw shape function. And you can see here in part 1, spaces before decrements by 1, and the stars to draw increments by 2. In part 2, we see that spaces before starts off at 1. There's already 1 space, and it only draws 1 star. And then we have the spaces inside, and we can see, like if you look at the row above, which is stars to draw equals 16, this spaces inside is actually 16 minus 4. So we can use that to initialize spaces inside. We see that spaces inside in part 2 decrements by 2 each time, so you see that getting smaller. And we see that this part loops for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, so that's n minus 1. And spaces before here increments by 1 as we go down. So in line 81 and line 82, we see how it increments and decrements. Similarly for part 3, spaces before that decrements, and spaces inside increments by 2. And it does that for n minus 1 times. And then we get to our final part where spaces before increments by 1, and we start off with the stars to draw. You can see that it actually is the same as the spaces inside, so we can set stars to draw to spaces inside, and then we decrement by 2 for n minus 1 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that corresponds to line 104 in the code here. So what we can see in our code is that there are also these other functions: draw spaces, draw stars, and draw new line. So these functions over here use the add node function, and this is what helps us build our linked list. So we have our struct that is for each node of our list. Each node contains an item, which is in this case a character, which could be a blank space, star, or a new line. And then it contains a link to the next node on the list. We also have the display shape function, which traverses through the list. It takes the head and we point to the head and go through the list until we reach the null pointer and print out each character. And this delete nodes function is where we do our memory management and clean up we clean up the nodes so we don't have any memory leaks. All right, and then this is the main function, and that's it.